Hello everyone and welcome to day 7 of my 8 Days of Christmas series. Today I'll be walking you through 6 of my holiday sweets that I made this year. Starting off, I have some old-fashioned butter cookies. This is a recipe I found in my mom's recipe box, and it is a tried and true method for some delicious cookies. You will need 1 cup of butter, 3/4 cup of sugar, 1 large egg, 2 tablespoons of milk, 1½ teaspoons of vanilla extract, 1 teaspoon of baking powder and ½ teaspoon of salt, and 3 cups of flour. You want your butter to be at room temperature, but if it is fresh from the fridge, I like to chop the butter into cubes and space them out so that it gets down to room temperature a lot faster. You do not want to put the butter in the microwave because it changes the molecular structure of the butter in some parts more than others. So basically it gets heated unevenly and this can change the consistency of the dough. Therefore, cutting the butter into smaller cubes creates less surface area and allows the butter pieces to naturally achieve room temperature a lot quicker and more accurately than placing it in the microwave. It takes about 20 to 30 minutes for the butter to get to room temperature, so usually I will go ahead and gather the rest of my ingredients and continue with the recipe. So right now I am going to combine the dry ingredients and lightly whisk everything together until it is all well incorporated. Once the butter has achieved room temperature, add it to the stand mixer and with a whisk attachment, soften the butter at medium speed. Then you're going to add all the wet ingredients on a slow speed. Now you are going to slowly add the dry ingredient mixture and mix until well incorporated. Lightly dust your work surface with flour and then turn out the cookie dough mixture. Use a rolling pin to roll the cookie dough out to about a 1/4 inch thickness. You can use whatever cookie cutters you want. What I used was a snowman head, a Christmas tree, a stocking, and a reindeer. You want to place the cookies on a sheet pan. We have this Silpat nonstick reusable baking sheet, which I highly recommend. It is linked below. They are super easy to clean and excellent for the environment, but if you do not have that, I would line a baking sheet with parchment paper. The cookies will not expand outwards, so you don't have to be too cautious about how close you put them, but you do want them to be evenly spaced out. Bake at 400 degrees for 5 to 8 minutes. Check after 5 minutes. The cookies should be golden brown around the edges of the bottom. To decorate the cookies, I made some lemon flavored royal icing, which is super easy to make, and I linked the recipe below. You can customize your icing by adding food coloring. I just decided to keep it white with a light decoration around the cookies, so I just basically outlined the cookies. Some of the cookies I did add sprinkles, but I added these on before baking them so that the sprinkles were baked into the cookies. The next dessert is a gingerbread house. I have not decorated a gingerbread house in so long, and I've never made one from scratch, so this is the first. To start off, you need to whisk together 6 cups of flour, half a teaspoon of baking powder, half a teaspoon of ground cloves, half a teaspoon of salt, 4 teaspoons of ground ginger, and 4 teaspoons of ground cinnamon. In a stand mixer with a paddle attachment, mix 1½ sticks of softened butter and 1½ cups of packed light brown sugar on medium speed. Once those ingredients are mixed, add in 2 large eggs, 1 cup of molasses, and 1 tablespoon of water. After the wet ingredients have become well combined, add in half of the dry mixture and incorporate on low speed. Then add the rest of the flour and mix until a cohesive dough forms. Turn out the dough onto a lightly floured surface and knead into a ball. The dough should be smooth and not very sticky. If it is, add more flour. Then split into 2, tightly wrap each dough ball with plastic wrap and refrigerate for at least 2 hours to overnight. After the dough is chilled, roll out the dough to a 1/4 inch thickness. I printed out a template for the house and just placed it on top of the rolled out dough. I used a pastry cutter thinking that it would make a cool design on the side, but it turned out to be such a pain to deal with when constructing the house after I baked it, so I would suggest just cutting it with a plain knife. The template that I printed out was not the size that the source suggested. It was actually a little bit smaller, so I only ended up using 1/2 of the dough. I then used the head of a gingerbread cookie cutter to make shingle designs on the roof halves. That way the decoration for the roof has been completed. And then I placed the pieces on a cookie sheet and baked for 10 minutes at 350 degrees. While the pieces are baking, make the royal icing mortar by whisking 2 large egg whites and 1 1/3 cup of divided powdered sugar until stiff peaks form. Put the icing in a Ziploc bag and cut off a small corner for piping. Once the pieces are out of the oven and fully cooled, the house is ready to be constructed. I constructed my house directly on my serving platter. You do need some patience with allowing the icing to harden to secure the walls of the house. I ended up not using the chimney pieces because it was too hard to assemble with the uneven sides. And then I just used some extra candy I had lying around as decoration. The next dessert is a family favorite and a super quick and easy recipe for some candied almonds. In a non-stick saucepan, combine half a cup of water, 1 cup of sugar, and a tablespoon of ground cinnamon. Bring to a boil on medium heat. Next, you want to add 2 cups of whole almonds. You want to cook this mixture until the liquid has evaporated and it looks like a syrupy coating on the almonds. Let the almonds dry on a baking sheet lined with parchment paper. Spread them out so that they are in a single layer. I also found that stirring the almonds around occasionally while they're drying made them not stick to the parchment paper as much. Cooling time should be about 15 minutes. The next recipe is nerd popcorn. Pop half a cup of popcorn kernels in an air popper. And then melt 16 ounces of vanilla candy coating in a double boiler until smooth. Lay out the popped popcorn and then evenly drizzle the melted chocolate using a fork and sprinkle on 5 ounces of nerd candy. Because I didn't actually fully coat the popcorn in the chocolate, I had some melted chocolate and nerd candy left over, so I just combined the two and spread it out onto a piece of parchment paper and let dry, and then I broke it up into chunks, so basically like the peppermint bark, I created some nerd bark. The last recipe I want to share is the Bûche de Noël, or the Ula Cake. I've been making one of these for the last 6 years after being introduced to it in my French class in high school. What I like about this cake is that it can be made in various ways. This year I decided to go with a chocolate sponge cake with white chocolate coconut filling and a hazelnut buttercream frosting. Start by dividing 4 eggs. Then add 1/3 cup of sugar to the egg yolks and mix until smooth. Then incorporate 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Then mix together a 1/4 cup of flour, a 1/4 cup of cocoa powder, a 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. You should then add this to the yolk mixture, but I did not read the instructions all the way, so I jumped to the next step, which was whipping the egg whites and gradually adding 2 tablespoons of sugar until stiff peaks formed. Next is to fold in the yolk mixture. Because mine was not mixed with the dry ingredients prior to the step, I think the egg yolks really weighed down the egg whites, which is not ideal. You really want to keep the airiness to the egg whites. The taste of the sponge still turned out delicious, but the texture was very soft and a little sticky when the sponge came out of the oven. You then want to spread the mixture evenly onto a cake pan lined with parchment paper and sprayed with non-stick spray. It is very important for the sponge to come off smoothly, and the parchment is necessary for the rolling bit of this recipe. You want the batter to be as even as possible with no air bubbles. Bake at 350 degrees for 10 minutes. Once the sponge is out of the oven, you want to turn it out of the pan as soon as possible. Coat the sponge with powdered sugar and use another piece of parchment to quickly flip the sponge out onto. The sponge is super flexible, so there's no need to pre-roll the cake. As it was drying, I made the white chocolate coconut filling, starting with caramelizing some coconut shred. To do this, bring 2 tablespoons of sugar and 1 tablespoon of water to a boil. Then add half a cup of shredded coconut and coat with the melted sugar water mixture. Keep stirring to prevent the shreds from burning. This process should take about 1 minute. Once a golden brown color is reached, transfer to a bowl and set aside to cool. Moving on to the frosting, melt 3½ ounces of white chocolate in a double boiler, then take off the heat and allow it to cool to room temperature. In a separate bowl, stir 4 ounces of cream cheese until smooth. Then add 1 tablespoon of powdered sugar, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and the cooled white chocolate. Once incorporated, add the caramelized coconut shreds, then place this mixture in the refrigerator. Next, whip up 1 cup of heavy whipping cream until stiff peaks form. I highly recommend using a stand mixer. I whipped it by hand because it was late at night and people were sleeping, so I wanted to be considerate and not use a stand mixer, but this took almost a half an hour, which shouldn't have taken so long, but I don't think the heavy whipping cream was cold enough when I started whipping it, so also make sure that your whipping cream is nice and chilled. Once stiff peaks are created, gradually add to the white chocolate mixture and spread evenly into the chocolate sponge. Next step is to roll the sponge. This is where the parchment paper comes in handy. You can see I try to use my hands to roll it, but the parchment paper makes it a lot easier. Also, you can see that my sponge is sticking rather well to the parchment paper, and this could have been fixed by adding more powdered sugar onto the bottom of the cake before flipping it over. Wrap the rolled cake in the parchment paper and refrigerate for 30 to 40 minutes. In the meantime, we will make the Nutella buttercream frosting. In a stand mixer, add a half a cup of softened butter, 2½ cups of powdered sugar, and 1 cup of Nutella. Spray the measuring cup with cooking spray so the Nutella comes out easier. Use a pedal attachment and beat on medium speed for 2 minutes. Start on a low speed and work your way up as the powdered sugar becomes more incorporated, otherwise this will happen. After 2 minutes, scrape down the sides of the bowl and add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract and 3 tablespoons of heavy whipping cream. Beat for another minute. Now it's time to frost and decorate the cake. I placed mine directly on the platter that I'm going to be serving it on. I always embellish my cake with homemade mushrooms, which are made of Belgian cocoa dusted truffles and wafer rolls. I break the wafer rolls to a length that I like, and then I attach it to the truffle with extra frosting. To make the cake look like a log, use a fork to lightly brush over the frosting to make it look like bark. You can also swirl the fork to make little knots in the wood. Lastly, I made a fresh-looking snowfall by running powdered sugar through a sifter and added a little deer and some rosemary sprigs. So that is all the Christmas baking I did this season. Everything turned out to be super yummy, and I am sure we will be munching on these well into the new year. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.